The Bliss Business Podcast, the show about empathy, connection, and consciousness in business. Today's episode is brought to you by Zero Company, your paid search, social media, and programmatic ad experts.
All right, Ardie, keep trash talking Mike on that pickleball.
Mike, listen, I have been playing tennis for a while, and pickleball players are an annoyance. That is more like being on a ping pong table, except for you're on concrete. I'm having this intense singles match, and all of a sudden, here come 4 pickleball players setting up a net and just bam, 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 just run off my opponent. And it's annoying. Like,
oh man, I know.
I can stay in the kitchen at home. I know you have to stay in pickleball. So I'm sorry.
Amazing.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the show. We aren't exploring pickleball today, but we are exploring the topic of building inclusive workplaces with empathy and authenticity. I'm Steven Sakach, here again with Mike Liwski and our special guest. We are live, so if you have questions or comments, send them along, and we'll try to get them in the mix during our conversation. Mike, introduce our guest today, even though she just trash talked you.
I know, Steve, I'm stabbed to the heart, but it's okay.
I love
Absolutely. It. I would love to. I can't wait for our followers and our listeners to really get a chance to know this lovely lady. So Ardie Harrison has been a trailblazer for some time now in creating inclusive workplaces. And with extensive experience in human resources and leadership, she's really got a long track record of developing impactful DEI programs and cultivating environments that truly support diversity, equity, and inclusion, which we know is a major topic in our business environment today. So currently, Ardie is focused on building structures that prioritize belonging, empathy, and authentic inclusion of all voices in the organizations that she works with. Her work has transformed the cultures of numerous organizations and helped countless of individuals thrive in environments that empower them to bring their full selves to work. So we're really honored to have her with us today. Ardie, welcome to our show.
Welcome, Mike, and I'm sorry about pickleball. I'm sorry.
It'll be okay. It'll be
good, Mike. Anyway, Ardie, are we making progress in building inclusive workplaces? It feels like there's been a little bit of ebb and flow lately in our country.
Yeah, I think we're making some progress. In other areas, you could find that we're probably have still a lot of opportunity. A lot of leaders, when it comes to just thinking about an awareness of inclusion, it's understanding, like, what does inclusion look like for my organization? What do I want inclusion to feel like? And if you can ask multiple organizations, you might get very, very different answers, because it's a very cultural centric type of a concept. But I think the levels of progress has just been the awareness that we need to have it. The ways in which perhaps we've fallen back is being afraid to have the conversations about what does that look like in my organization. There's certain things that people in organizations want to stay away from because it feels too controversial, and they don't want to tackle that. So, yeah, I think there's a plus and minus on both sides for sure.
Has it always been too controversial, or has that just been kind of a lately thing, or is it? I mean, you've had the career path in this area for quite a while. How has your journey seen it sort of evolve over time with some of these conversations?
Well, I think one of the pivotal points happened with George Floyd's murder. That was a pivotal point, not that it was something new, but it surfaced it in such a way where now the conversations were more engaging because people wanted to talk about it. There was now more of a desire to want to have training around it. There was a more desire to bring in outside parties because within the organizations, people were just not equipped to have those conversations because they were difficult. There were lots of biases, and we all have biases, and biases alone are not a bad thing. But it's just, how do you temper the conversation when it gets to be at a certain point and you don't know where to pivot? Then you end up creating more harm than you do good, because you're stuck with not being able to move the organization forward. And so with this desire that organizations had to be able, particularly after that event, to move their organization in a different way. They began to look at things like, how are we showing up in the community? What does our website look like? Do we have a website that invites people, that shows that we're inclusive? Organizations began to take an internal look and say, we're not being very inclusive. Just about everybody in our organization looks like me. And we're more than just that. And so there was this hard push towards understanding, where do we have opportunities? How did we get here? And where do we want to go to this next stage? And so oftentimes what they found is they didn't have the qualified skills within their organizations to move that pendulum. So they went outside the organization. They began to do things like bringing in DEI directors or individuals that are expert in that area to do surveys, to understand, where are we as an organization? Where do we truly want to go? Who are the clients that we service? Who participates in the business that we offer? So that hard look made them realize that there were more gaps than expected. So now the issue became, how do we move past the gaps? How do we address the gaps? Who do we really want to be? So it's not a one size fits all, because it is a cultural fit that you must consider when you're deciding, how do we want to be more inclusive? And at the bottom line, when you have inclusive employees, you have employees that feel respected. They feel like they belong, like they're a part of the organization. So you've got to take the hard steps and make the hard decisions about how will we get there. That means allowing people to speak their hearts, even though you may not like what they're going to say, but being able to hear that without being defensive, without making them feel as though they're less than, because more than anything, people want to feel heard, valued, and accepted, like they belong.
Yeah, it definitely felt like with George Floyd, it was this active conversation suddenly that everyone is like, enough. We need to really just talk about this stuff, and not just, carry on as normal, and be actively evaluating everything, like you mentioned.
Yeah, I had an organization during that time. If I can just be very explicit in the respect of the dynamics, this was a major organization here that had locations in a lot of different places. The owner was a white female, but there was a percentage of her employees that were people of color that were vividly experiencing direct racist behaviors from their peers who were a Caucasian. They even had clients that when they came in, they specifically asked for one of the either white females or someone else to provide the service versus the person of color. The owner needed to have an outside party to come in and have these hard conversations, because she felt between a rock and a hard place, but she did not want to be dismissive of their concerns. So I facilitated this conversation, and she brought into an outside location all of her employees of color, and she listened as I garnered the conversation and gave them a safe space to talk about their experiences, which when she heard it, she had no idea that they were being treated in the fashion that she had heard. They felt heard because now they had a platform to be able to express their experiences. And she recognized that there was a clear differentiation between how she thought her employees were being treated and how certain ones were not being treated in the same fashion, and how internally there was just a lot of rifting. So it's one thing to surface it, but now she had to go to action mode. So having me there to do that was one thing. And so her next steps of actions were to form these smaller groups so she could get a better sense for how can we change this culture and how did we get here? And really her as a leader, putting a rock in the sand or a pitchfork in the sand and saying, we're going to change our behaviors. It's going to start with me and my awareness of hearing how my employees who are servicing the public are being treated. So it was a very intense, very uncomfortable, but it needed to happen. And while that may be one example, and maybe every conversation and organization may not go that way, it's creating the safe space for people to be able to express and be able to then take action to that.
It's interesting that you had to you purposely kind of move them outside of the business, right, to start that conversation to kind of, hey, it's not a safe space apparently, where it's currently at, right? That sounds like it was a very purposeful move in that regard.
It was, because she recognized, I believe, in speaking with her, that there was no place within the business physical four walls, that she could do this without it looking like she's just pulling together one sector of employees and everybody else is not involved. They're already uncomfortable. So they needed a safe space. Otherwise, they would not have spoken up the way that they had. And honestly, it was quite surprising, even some of the things that I'd heard,
Wow. Well, it was really nice you were able to provide that forum. Those are difficult conversations, and it's sometimes employees need to have that. So, Ardie, there's organizations out there that say, okay, we want to be inclusive, right? We want to start to diversify, and they start to hire more diverse talent. But it doesn't really just stop with that, right? I mean, how do you help organizations build that culture? Like the example that you just gave, but maybe there's other things that you've done. How do you help them really build that culture so that everybody in the organization truly feels valued?
And that's a great question, Mike. An even better question than the pickleball earlier that we talked about. But before we kind of breeze over, like diversity, sort of like having a basic awareness of that.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit more about just the complexity and the multi-dimensional nature of just diversity. Because sometimes when people hear diversity, they just think one thing,
right,
maybe two things. But I believe that when you can add value by understanding the broader prospects of diversity, then you can go towards inclusivity. So I'm going to give you an exercise, and your audience that's listening. So I want you to think, get in mind a picture of an iceberg. Okay. So the thing about an iceberg is that you are only seeing the smallest portion of the iceberg, which is above the water. The largest portion of that iceberg is beneath the surface, and it's invisible, to your naked eye, so you really can't see that. But this is how a person's diversity characteristics appear. And so what I mean by that is above the waterline, like that's what's obvious, the obvious characteristics, like a person's skin color or their physical abilities, maybe their language or even their age. And now, mind you, if you look at me and you mistake me for 25, I'm okay with that. So that's quite fine. But many of our richest characteristics, they go unnoticed because it's just like that iceberg. It's beneath the surface. It's not obvious to your naked eye. Things like, for example, a person's value system or their learning style, their heritage. You can't see that. Their
right,
culture, their religion, unless they tell you, you can't see that. Their military experience. We just recognized Veterans Day. Political views. Their education, their talent. Even their family status, their sexual orientation, how they identify from a gender perspective, and even their neuro abilities, their parental status, all of these amazing things. If you think about it, this is the complexity of diversity. So if you understand how complex we are from that perspective, then you go beyond just a basic awareness. And then you begin to look at the totality of a person, because the totality of each of us is not basic. It's far more than that. So when you're trying to actively create this inclusive type of a culture, you have to be willing to discuss the things that are beneath the surface, the diversity that oftentimes gets avoided. And the main reason that a lot of individuals may avoid having those conversations is because it can cause stereotypes or biases or microaggressions. And then this ends up leading to the very opposite of what the culture wants, which is exclusion. You start to allow those types of things to come in. So the way, Mike, to your question, to kind of foster more of an inclusive culture, and this is a way to make everyone sort of feel involved and valued and purposeful. A couple of things that come to mind is you have to prioritize diversity. You have to hire a diverse workforce that really reflects the world around you. The world is just not one way. So you've got to make sure that there's that mix of dynamics there. Another thing is you want to address unconscious bias. That can be done by providing training so that everyone is helped and they understand how to address unconscious bias. It's best not to be assumptive that people should just know, but give them a common language so everybody understands how do you address it, right? Another thing is to look at your policies, create inclusive policies. This might mean maybe, for example, implementing flexible work arrangements, equal pay type policies, maybe accommodations for people that have a disability. So you have a policy that is creating inclusiveness. Another thing is just give people a voice. People want to be heard. So allow individuals or people to have influence in the decision-making process. You might be making a major organizational decision. Bring in people from different departments and see what they think. What are their thoughts around it? And oftentimes you will find some of the most creative ideas come from the very people that were not at the table. Another thing you could do is empower managers. Provide the managers with the type of knowledge around inclusion so that they can lead from a more inclusive team mindset, not just a me, my, I, but how do we do this inclusively? And then I would say just create a safe space. When people feel safe enough to have a conversation like the one I had to lead from an outside company, they felt safe enough because 1, they didn't know me. 2, I was not there to judge them. 3, they could connect with me because in this particular case, I look like them. But 4, they were comfortable. And so making the employees feel like there's a safe space for them, it brings them or gives them the opportunity to bring their authentic selves to work.
Yeah. Yeah. And saying that can be an absolute, massive challenge, is an understatement, particularly when you've got really large organizations. But it really does seem that it's got to be core, right? Having that inclusive culture has got to be there if, folks are going to really want to feel like, hey, I'm a part of this. I want to stay and I'm really contributing to it.
Yeah. And to your point, a lot of that, it has to start with leadership. Employees cannot set the culture. They can drive it after you've established it. But if leadership is in one space and the employees are in a different place, then you have a self-defining culture. It's day by day. So it has to start with leadership. That's why a lot of times when we work with organizations, we start with leadership training. We need to understand where are your thoughts around this? Because if you're dismissive of it, then imagine what your employees must be experiencing. They don't feel safe to come and speak to leadership.
Yeah, we're just going to be going through an exercise at this point, right?
Yeah.
They're not going to really.
I always feel like that's definitely the first place to start. And it usually, to me, it's really, people are so used to that hierarchical structure of business, and where leadership really now is to switch that to be in service to everyone on their team. And then what we've done lately is, and our company has really switched to this sort of self-managed sort of structure, to where this allows people to, it really is empowering. I'm enjoying watching it happen. People step into leadership roles where they feel comfortable with, and then back into, a follower role where they're a little less comfortable, but it's very fluid, and I'm enjoying the process with that. I want to touch back though on something you said, Ardie, about helping people with the unconscious bias aspect. Where do you start with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things that we have found is effective is helping people to understand that bias is something that we all have, first of all. So it's not a bad thing in of itself, but it's how you begin to use it, how you use it where it becomes at a disservice to others. So when it comes to unconscious bias, is making people aware of how bias shows up in the workplace, how we end up adversely impacting circumstances and people that we don't even realize we're doing when we're acting in that fashion. So, for example, let's say that a company is posting jobs and they're trying to hire for whatever the position might be. I see in the chat they mentioned something about the IT world. So let's say they're doing that. There are biases that can appear in job descriptions that can be very unconscious. And when that happens, it ends up alienating certain people from applying. Let's say that the job description advertisement has a lot of gender biases, like he and this, that kind of thing. Then it gives the impression that females, for example, are not necessarily as welcomed in the role. There's a website that I have given to people, and I can share it here. It's a gender decoder, and the website is gender-decoder.catmatfield, which is KATMATFIELD. So the entire thing is gender-decoder-catmatfield.com. And what that does is you'll put your job posting or job description in there, and it will immediately show you where are the gender leverage language that are adverse to your posting, where certain language is more male focused versus female. There's also another one called You Include, the letter U, include.com, where you can utilize that to try and write in a more inclusive fashion. Because the unconscious part is you're not aware that you're doing it, and you're wondering why perhaps you're not getting as many, let's say, candidates of a certain gender, because it's how you framed that. So to your point, Stephen, it's a training around, first of all, what is bias, and then how does it become unconscious? Because oftentimes it's done, and most of the time it's not even intentional. Most of the time it's not intentional. Like, for example, we were doing a training one time, and one of the examples that was given, someone says, oh, you're a person of color. And they may say, oh, you speak so very well. Now, would you say that same thing to a person who is not in color? So the implication there is clearly, as a person of color, you wouldn't typically speak that well, but you speak well. See, so that's sort of like an unconscious bias, but it's not received very well by the recipient in that case. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, and I think the
Definitely.
recipient too, at some point, you just become so fatigued with so many things too, and it's hard to have grace in a scenario where, okay, what's this person's intention?
Yeah.
What do they really mean? Because it's just you just become tired, I think, and people have been just so tired lately of it.
Oh,
And it's it's so understandable. I want to switch gears just a little bit because I want to make sure I ask this question from you, because I'm really interested in helping companies find their higher purpose and helping individuals find their higher purpose. And if that's a goal for companies, is bringing those two together, how can HR kind of help those two together? I know it's a little different than what we're talking about, but I want to make sure I ask this just because I do think it's really that empowering energy can kind of come together there when you can get those two things to merge. And I don't know, is that a future of HR? Is that something you actively are involved in, or is this a very obtuse
well,
topic?
it's probably the latter, but I love the question because our audience here clearly is diverse in thinking. So it's not just a now, it's a tomorrow. So finding that purpose, right? Oftentimes what you'll find, and HR can be an integral part of that. And it depends on how an organization empowers HR and the level of engagement that they have with the staff. Some staff, for example, in organizations are not comfortable coming to HR. So you have to create a culture where we're here to support and be able to help you with your next career move. So the ways in which HR can certainly do that is you can do career assessments. You can look internally within your, for example, your performance evaluations. You're rating or reviewing me on this particular role, but has the organization done succession planning where they're now looking at Bob or Susan because she has the potential to now be a manager? How do I prepare Bob or Susan over the next 3 years to be ready for that next role in this organization? What am I doing internally to prepare her for that? Is there mirroring of other roles? Am I giving her stretch opportunities where she or he can learn a portion of this job without Bob feeling like she's trying to take my job, versus the organization setting them both up to success to say, we want to increase your talents and your abilities. And to couple with that, Mike and Steve, is a lot of organizations, particularly during the Great Resignation, they were leaving for 50 cents here, a dollar here. The reality of all this leaving and moving is that the grass turns brown on the other side too. It looks green for a while, but it's going to turn brown. So organizations were not able to keep up with this increase in salaries. It was not sustainable. So for you to maintain your human capital within your organization, you've got to invest in people. That means giving them the opportunity to grow. It might even mean upskilling existing individuals in order to keep up with how society is changing economically. There's AI that's replacing people's skills. So how do you upskill and enhance a person's skills so that now they're ready for that next opportunity? They're ready to be in growth mode, and you're ready to have more sustainability because it's very costly to have a high turnover. You got to start over again. There's a cost with that. You have no continuity in the learning stage. So the biggest answer, or the largest and best answer, is internal investment and not being afraid for the employees to learn something new. What I've also found is that people that have been in roles for a long time, sometimes they're very adverse to change. So for you to grow to that next level, you've got to be open to not just manually doing things in Excel, but understanding how that can be automated, for example. So it's a two-way street for both sides, upskilling. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Do you find with newer generations, they're coming to the workforce with different needs?
Yes. And one of those, there's a lot of organizations that have multiple generations. And so we always like to tell organizations, understand the idiosyncrasies of each generation. Many now, most top of the mind is they want to know, is this job remote or is it hybrid? Because the pandemic taught us that we don't have to be in four walls, behind four walls, to be effective and generate results. We've gotten used now to this work mindset. So they're coming to the workplace now wanting that flexibility. You shouldn't expect someone to come to your organization and be there till they retire. That's just not how the market works anymore. They may be here 3 years, 2 years, and they're moving on, not because they can't keep a job, but you have to keep them challenged and engaged. They're looking for the next challenge and the next opportunity. So organizations have to be more mindful that they create flexibility in the workplace that's engaging enough so that they have multiple generations of people building value internally. Pair, for example, someone from a baby boomer with someone that's a millennial and allow that cohesion to really grow internally. So, yeah.
Super important. So we've got a question here for you, Ardie, from one of our listeners. It said, good afternoon. A question regarding companies that have initiated DEI programs. So once a company launches a DEI initiative, it seems that it's essential to measure the program's effectiveness to understand its success and areas needing improvement. What key metrics and evaluation methods can be employed to assess the success or areas for improvement of the DEI initiative within an organization?
Yeah, that is I think that's a very targeted and an excellent question. And so I'm going to phrase it like this. What doesn't get measured doesn't get tracked. If it's not on your radar to track it, it doesn't exist. And I think we've all heard that numbers don't lie, right? So tracking your DEI I think it is empirical data that you got to have in order to make some sense of if you're making progress or if you're not making progress towards whatever your goals are. So that becomes your baseline. And first, I want to talk about maybe some of the key metrics that you should include when you're thinking about your DEI program, such as you want to look at your demographics across the organization levels. Look at your retention across different groups. Do we have high turnover in IT? We got high turnover in accounting. Why is that? Look at your overall employee turnover. Look at the adverse impact of what's happening within the organization when this turnover occurs. Look at your candidate demographics. Where are you pulling your candidates from? Look at how internally employees are either advancing. What's the promotion rate? Is it just strictly over here in finance that people are getting promoted, or is it not happening over here in customer service? Look at your equal pay equity, and look at your employee resource groups, even if you have any of those. When you're looking at trying to create sustainable change, it is making sure that once you identify whatever those metrics are that you are measuring, that how are you now going to make changes so that the paradigm shifts. So for example, if one of your metrics is you're trying to increase the number of female in the manufacturing department of your company because the ratios are low, then where are you advertising? How are you making that role appealing to the women? And so if your goal is to increase it by 10%, then you've got to be intentional, laser focused on how you're going to do that. Maybe you, for example, advertise the flexibility of, let's say, mothers that are at home. They've dropped the kids off, so they're available from 9 to 3. Maybe you create a separate shift just for mothers in that particular time frame. Now they have the flexibility, still be mom, still be wife, but they come in that time frame. So you're intentionally going after people that will help fuel that particular metric, which is females, and you're giving them purpose and engagement. Now they can make their own money and feel happy. So it's understanding the baseline, being intentional about it, and don't have too many at one time. Like, create some successes, right? There are some low-hanging fruit things that you could do immediately, like going specifically, let's say if you're trying to increase the minorities, millennials in your organization, then pivot to HBCUs, historically Black colleges, for example. Whatever your metric is, you've got to be intentional about that. Have a baseline, have a goal, measure where you are, and then see how you're going to alter it. Because if it's working, it's working. And if it's not, that's your sign to make alterations.
Yeah, right. Yeah, then you can absolutely make adjustments. So Mia, go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, no, I wanted to, first thanks Mia Thompson for that question. And I want to kind of piggyback on what you're saying there. One of the big shifts for companies is, they're so focused on just that sole pursuit of, profit, the bottom line number. And really the next big shift is to try and find those other sort of metrics that can allow you to move from just profit to people and planet and profit, and kind of start planning toward each of those things. And so these are like those people sort of metrics, so that now, instead of we're just sole focus on profit, because you'll run over people when you're doing that, and time again, right? And we've seen it. But now you've got all these other metrics to keep your eyes on. Do you think that's like just a very important move to go from just, profit to like something like that triple bottom line, like people, planet, profit, or like conscious capitalism? It's got, it takes into consideration all stakeholders in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Because think about it. What organization operates without people? That's your biggest investment. And when you've got happy employees, people that want to be a part of your organization, they're talking about your business. And if you think about the impact of social media on an organization, a few bad comments from a few employees can have an adverse impact on your bottom line. Now they're not buying from you because what they've heard. So internally is where you have to start. And if you want to have that level of impact, it is not only operating with a level of empathy, but creating a culture where people want to be in your organization. Sometimes you have to move out the bad apples because they're not to use it in a negative way, but they're kind of a cancer and adversity in the organization because they're running people off. So you got to think big picture. We got to make some pivotal changes. It may cost us something. There may be some sunk cost in what we have to do, but the long range goal is to have the impact now so we can have a greater impact later. Yeah.
And sometimes actually, like it's this, let me just follow up, Mike. Sorry.
Okay.
Because you just mentioned the bad apples. Like sometimes you see, if you're just solely focused on that profit number, you can have some very ruthless people that are very good at getting you that number, but steamrolling over, like you said, kind of other parts of the organization, that one bad apple sort of approach. And I don't know, I think it's why sometimes we have some very strange leaders that end up in position leading people that probably should not be. Go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Yeah, no. So the point I was going to make was DEI initiatives and their success don't need to be made at the sacrifice of profit. I think a lot of the statistics out there have shown that
it's like backs up all of it anyway. So it's
right. Exactly. And I have had a long history working in the financial services world, right? Which was what, very heavy male, very heavy Caucasian. And one of the dangers that, we started to see in that industry was concentration of portfolios, right? Because everyone was sort of thinking the same way, and then that brought concentration risk. So, having worked for an organization that started a diversity and inclusion initiative, we started to get all kinds of other thoughts in the conversations, things that we were never even thinking about as far as risk. And I'll give you just a very simple example of this, right? I was trying to help my kids become a little bit more financially literate. So I started to involve them into the conversations about stocks I was thinking of buying, which, again, you're thinking as an adult, all right, you obviously know better, right? This is what we should be doing these days. And my girls would, when they were little, they'd came and they're like, Dad, do not buy Roadblocks. No, none of the kids are playing Roadblocks anymore. Like, and then the same thing, just a couple of years ago, I my eyes were open to, hey, they know they've got their beat right on what's going on, their finger on the beat. And they're like, do not buy Nike. Like it's terrible. Like it's starting to get a bad reputation. And you can just look at what the stock has done. So again, I don't think that these initiatives need to be made at the sacrifice of profit. If not, look at your lifetime value of your customers that going up, right? Look at profit margins going up when you start to do this. So it actually does in the end benefit, the bottom line as much, people may not think it might.
Yeah. And you make an excellent point, because I'm going to go back from a generational perspective. Gen Z and millennials and others now, even more so. When you're about to do service or business with an organization, oftentimes you'll go to the website. And for certain generations, they're really looking at who is a part of this organization. What's their social economic mission? Do they give to, organizations? Who are they? What are they about? And they're more socially conscious about how organizations show up in the world. And there's a connection for that with them. So an organization needs to not separate the two, but they work in concert. The value of the employees, the bottom line, and how do we marry those things? Because if you don't have happy employees, you've got an increase in turnover, and your costs are going to be impacted. So your bottom line's not going to look like what you budgeted anyway. So your problem oftentimes is systemic from within, and it's not something that can't be solved. You can call on an HR knowledge source like us. We could help you with that. We can certainly do that. But it's really important to value the human capital, because it is really what marches the business forward. And separating out diversity, equity, inclusion, more so this idea of inclusion, it truly, truly has an adverse impact, because people will often not stay where they don't feel like they add value.
So Ardie, one topic that we talk a lot about here on this show is empathy, right? And empathy has to be a part of inclusion, I would imagine. Can you tell us, I guess, when it comes to empathy, some ways that you've had to, cultivate it, or things that you've done to cultivate empathy in organizations?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. There is her name is Brene Brown, and she speaks a lot about vulnerability. She's a great researcher. And the thing about empathy is that you have to be aware that it's not about you. Being present for others simply means sometimes people just want you to be able to listen. And if you're the type of leader in an organization where you're barfing out orders and you're get it done by Friday, not realizing or being conscious that you've already given Susan 12 other priorities. So what are the priorities? So you're dehumanizing Susan or Bob, whoever it might be, but you're also being unaware of the impact of your insensitivity. And empathy doesn't mean you have to pull out the Kleenex and cry with me. It just means sometimes you just need to listen. You need to have an awareness. If I tell you about a personal event, maybe I just need you to listen. And when leaders recognize that you can make time for this, it doesn't need to be every session, but maybe you setting up one-on-ones with employees, that it's not about me reviewing your performance. It's how are you today? One technique that we use and that I use as well is when we're working with organizations, you get to know people, know them by their first name, know that Mike has 2 girls, know that,
Likes pickleball.
And likes pickleball for some reason.
You're not going to hold it against me.
Well, I'm sorry that you don't like to run on the tennis course, but when you're ready, I will be ready for you. Just these little small things you get to know about people, it can go a long way. I'll give you a perfect example. I was working with an organization, and because I was from the outside working in, and we don't come into an organization like we're, just so unknown about what you do that we're just here to barf out orders. We build a partnership so I get to know the employees. We're a partnership. We're not there to look under your hood and say, oh, look at all the things you're doing wrong.
Right.
To know Susan and Mary. And now I'm connecting with you because I always try to find out at least one thing about a person so I can check in on them. How are you doing? How's your husband doing? How did that pickleball game go? Those kinds of things. But when you connect at the smallest levels, when it comes to empathy, people begin to realize that now I'm valued for more than just the person that's completing your finance reports, that you literally asked me about my family, that my son just had a soccer game, that I was sick last week and you checked on me. Empathy has a small amount of maybe time, but this value and impact are much longer. Because I'm going to remember that Stephen asked me about my child's soccer game. I'm going to remember that. That feels more personal. So empathy, don't look at it as some negative concept like I've got to be all emotional. It's really about being present, being aware, being able to listen, understanding, and just acknowledging people. Acknowledge is really key. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That was a really good point. I like that notion of acknowledging it, right? It's because that we can build a little bit more understanding where people are at.
Yeah, I like it. At our office, we've kind of got this, it's this beautiful location, but one of the practices that people kind of do is they take a walk. Hey, do you want to go on a walk? And so you get, it's not just, well, I've had some very good conversations as leadership on, hey, let's go take a walk. But it's not just leader scenario. It's like, employees connecting in a way. And it's, you're typically not talking about work out there either. So it's just this nice little break that they have where they can kind of do something together. And it's just very random. We like to make these things systems all the time, so that it's repeatable, but it is something that does repeat a lot. Ardie, let me ask you this final question that we always kind of ask people. It's based around empathy, compassion, and maybe you've seen pushback from this, maybe you haven't, but what do you say to someone that's a little leery about love, belonging in business?
That's an excellent question. And so the first thing I would do is not have a reaction in my face because they had a reaction with the idea. I would have more of a reaction around, help me to understand, how do you perceive this to show up in the workplace? I'm not speaking of love in a romantic way. I'm speaking of general care and concern for your fellow man. Having respect for people is a way of also showing love for them. Being able to listen, your tone of voice, how your body language interacts with them also is a way of engaging where they feel that not only do you care, but there's a tone of empathy even around that. If you see someone showing up with, folded shoulders and a stern look and a tone in their voice that makes you feel like I can't really engage with this person, you're going to push back. So part of this is self-awareness about what that love can look like in this workplace, care and concern, being there for someone when they are in need. And also the idea of just simply understanding you don't have all the answers. And when you engage other people from an empathetic perspective, you're valuing the wholeness of who they are, but you're also showing that in this workplace, we can do those things and still be respectful and not cross any lines with each other. Because at the end of the day, we spend a lot of time together. So why not just be kind, smile?
Mm-hmm.
A smile goes a long way. See, watch what happens when I smile. Watch what Stephen does.
Yeah, for sure. No, you can't help it. It's contagious. I love that we get such nuanced answers on that question. Like, it's just always so different perspectives from everybody. And I guess that goes back to diversity. So there you go. Let's finish with tell people about where they can learn more about what you do. Where should they go?
Absolutely. We would love for you to go to our website at www.hrknowledgesource.com. hrknowledgesource.com. And as was mentioned, we are a faith-based, minority-owned international business consulting firm that we major and specialize in talent management. And so our firm is led by former VPs of HR and experts in staffing and consulting. And so we have decades of experience, but most importantly, we are industry agnostic.
Nice. Ardie, thank you again for joining us today. Thank you to our listeners. Tune in on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays every week, and we will see you on the next Bliss Business Podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
See you later.